citizens hearing. Clearly important topics around content moderation. I'm a skeptic of the content moderation policies that exist, both because I don't think the standards are very transparent and I don't think the execution is very consistent. That said, I'm more skeptical than a lot of my colleagues, I think on both sides of the aisle, about whether or not there's a regulatory fix that will make it better instead of worse. I especially think it's odd that so many in my party are zealous to do this right now when you would have an incoming administration of the other party that would be writing the rules and regulations about it. And I think it's telling that a number of folks on the other side of the dais, I think of Senator Blumenthal, a guy I like, but who seemed to almost be giddy about the prospect of a new government regulatory agency to police online speech. And I think a lot of people on my side should take pause at the idea that so many on the other side of the aisle are excited about having the next administration get to write these rules and regulations. But to the broader question, first, just to get to kind of a level set, and I want to thank both the witnesses for being here today. But when Senator Lee lays out some of the issues he did about, just every human community is going to be situated in a different place about policy commitments and priorities and beliefs. But when Senator Lee said that 93% of Facebook employees who contribute to politics do so on the left, and 99%, I think it was, of Twitter employees contribute on the left, I would just be interested to see if either of the two of you think that has implications in the shepherding of your organizations. Again, I recognize fully that you're private organizations, and so again, I'm more skeptical of a governmental fix for a lot of the problems we're talking about here today. But I'm curious as to whether or not Mr. Zuckerberg and Mr. Dorsey, and I guess we'll start with Facebook, I'm curious as to whether or not you think it's likely that there is systemic bias inside your organization in the execution of content moderation policies, given that your employee base is so unrepresentative of America in general.
Senator, I think it's a good question, and certainly I think it means that we have to be more intentional about what we do and thoughtful. Our principle and goal is to give everyone a voice and to be a platform for all ideas. As you mentioned, I do think it's undisputed that our employee base, at least the full-time folks, politically would be somewhat, or maybe more than just a little somewhat, to the left of where our overall community is, where the community basically spans almost wide varieties of people across society. So I do think that means that we need to be careful and intentional internally to make sure that bias doesn't seep into decisions that we make. Although I'd point out a couple of things. One is that people have a lot of different views outside of work, and we expect and I think generally see that people conduct themselves professionally. And second, the folks who are doing the content review work, we have about 35,000 people doing content review, are typically not based in Silicon Valley. They're based in places all over the country and all over the world, because we serve people in countries all over the world. So I think that the geographic diversity of that is more representative of the community that we serve than just the full-time employee base in our headquarters in the Bay Area.
Thanks, Mr. Zuckerberg. Mr. Dorsey?
Yeah, this is obviously not something we interview for, and even have an understanding of when people are in the company. And with that understanding, we intend to make sure that both our policy and our enforcement is objective. And I realize that it looks rather opaque, and certainly the outcomes might not always match up with that intention, with our intention, and the perception of those outcomes may not match up. But that's why I think it's so important that we're not just transparent around our policies, but the actual operations of our content moderation. If people don't trust our intent, if people are questioning that, that's a failure. And that is something that we need to fix and intend to fix. And I think it would benefit the industry as well. But I do, again, point back to something I said earlier in the testimony, which is a lot of these decisions are not being made by humans anymore. They're being made by algorithms. And that's certainly enforcement decisions, but also decisions around what you see or what you don't see. And to me, that is the body of work. That is the conversation that we should be focused on, because that is the enduring use case for everyone who interacts with these services.
Thank you, and I wish it were true that these were all easy, objective questions. That the questions were, if somebody says, "Is the sky green?" That's an objective question. That the sky is blue and white, not green. But most of the things we're talking about here, and the places where you're applying content moderation labels, are not really simply objective questions. They're mostly subjective questions. If we talked about Medicare for all being, easily paid for inside a 10-year budget window on assumptions X, Y, and Z that don't raise taxes, that's not true. There isn't any math by which Medicare for all pays for itself in some short-term window. But I don't think any of us really think you're going to slap a label on that saying this is disputed, accounting or math or policy projections. And so really what's happening is there's a prioritization grid that people are going through as they build even the algorithms, even those that aren't driven by humans, and they're driven by policy priorities of situated individuals. I may be wrong about this, but my suspicion is that your employee base is not actually 99% left of center. I bet it's less than that. And I would speculate that part of the reason less than 1% of your employees give money to candidates on the right is because there's a social stigma attached to having conservative views inside your organization. And I would guess that those same sort of internal cultural biases inform the subjectivity of which issues end up labeled. So again, this is sort of an odd place to be in that I am skeptical that the content moderation policies are thought out well. They're not transparent enough for us to really know, but I'm definitely skeptical that they're consistently applied. And yet I'm not really on the side of thinking there's some easy governmental fix here. There's a lot about Section 230 that we could debate. I think some of the things Senator Durbin said about how in the era of telephones, nobody blamed the phone company for other people having spread misinformation by the phone. Exactly. That's what would be the case if Section 230 were actually neutral, but you're applying content moderation policies and seemingly in a way that's not objective. So I know that I'm nearly at time, but I think it would be useful for us to hear from both of you to give a sort of 3 or 5 year window into the future. If there isn't new legislation, what is changing besides just saying we're moving from humans to more AI? What qualitatively is changing in the way content moderation happens inside your organizations, short of a new regulatory scheme? Can you tell us where you think you're actually improving and what problems you're trying to solve? Mr. Zuckerberg, you first, please.
Senator, one of the areas that we're very focused on is transparency, both in the process and in the results. So we're already at the point where every quarter we issue a community standards enforcement report that basically details the prevalence of each category of harmful content and how effective we are at addressing it before people have to even report it to us. Over time, we would like to fill that out and have more detail in that and make it more robust. We've already committed to an independent external audit of those metrics that people can trust them even more. People have lots of different kinds of requests for where we might go with that in the future, whether that's breaking down the stats by country or language or into more granular buckets, adding more data around precision. But I think that would all be very helpful so that people can see and hold us accountable for how we're doing. And for what it's worth, I think that would be a valuable part of a regulatory framework that would not feel particularly overreaching to me, is something that could be put in law that would create an apples to apples framework that all companies in this space would have to report on the outcomes and effectiveness of their programs in that way. So at least we can see how everyone is doing. That seems like a sensible step to me.
Thank you. Mr. Dorsey.
Senator Whitehouse.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Dorsey's still answering the same question, and then I'll give it back to you in a hurry, Mr.
So
Lee.
sorry, I missed that.
It's a junior acting chairman. Mr. Dorsey.
Thank you. Well, I mean, if we're considering 3 to 5 years out, I think the realization that a centralized global content moderation system does not scale, and we need to rethink how we operate these services. And I would point to, we certainly need transparency around any process that we have, and around the practice and the outcomes of those moderations. But I think having more control so that individuals can moderate themselves, pushing the power of moderation to the edges and to our customers and to the individuals using the service is something we'll see more of. And I also believe that having more choice around how algorithms are altering my experience and creating my experience is important. So being able to turn off ranking algorithms, being able to choose different ranking algorithms that are found, written by third-party developers and somewhat of an algorithmic marketplace, I think is important, and a future that would excite and energize us.
Thank you. I've appreciated my interaction with both of your companies in the run-up to this, and I think both of you said some meaty things there about ways we can move toward greater transparency, so I'll follow up again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Gentlemen, let me start with just a moment's history to give some context to my questions. When the tobacco industry discovered that its product was deadly, it responded to that news with a systematized program of denying that set of facts. The upshot for the tobacco industry was not great. It was found in federal court to have been engaged in massive fraud and was put under court order to cease its fraudulent behavior. At around the same time, the fossil fuel industry began to run into a similar problem regarding the effects of its product, and it picked up the tobacco industry scheme kind of where it left off, including using some of the same individuals, some of the same entities, many of the same methods as the tobacco industry's denial operation. These are persistent, highly motivated, very well-funded and complex information operations, not unlike a hostile intelligence service would run. And they are quite secretive. And we're now seeing a new form, I guess you'd call it election denial, happening around our country right now. So that's the background that I come at this from seeing. And I'm wondering if each of you see a difference between individual error and basically mass disinformation. Is there a difference between odd people with fringe views who offer personal opinions and an orchestrated plan of deliberate misinformation or disinformation that is driven by motivated interests, whether foreign or domestic?
Senator, I absolutely think that there's a difference, and you can see it in the patterns of use on the platforms, and in our policies and operations. We view these coordinated, inauthentic behavior operations, networks of fake and sometimes combining with real accounts to push out a message, but make it seem like it's coming from a different place than it is, or might be more popular than it is. This is what we saw the Internet Research Agency out of Russia do in 2016. And since then, a number of other governments and private organizations, including some companies like what you've mentioned, have engaged in this behavior. Now, the good news is that I think that the industry has generally gotten its systems to be a lot more sophisticated to defend against that in the last several years. It's a combination of AI systems that we've built to find networks of accounts that aren't really behaving quite the way that a normal person would, coupled with large numbers of content reviewers, sometimes with expertise in counterterrorism or counterintelligence, and then some signal sharing, whether it's with the intelligence community, law enforcement, different groups that have expertise in different areas, and with other tech platforms. But this is a big effort on I think all of our sides to make sure that we can defend against this kind of interference. And I think we are getting better and better at it.
Well, let me encourage you to persist. As you know, the last time you were here, you were asked about advertising paid for on Facebook denominated in rubles, which was not a very sophisticated scheme to be able to penetrate, but Facebook was unable to penetrate it. And your upgrade from that original setup was simply to allow a shell corporation to intermediate between the real actor and not. So I encourage you to continue to try to make sure that real voices are what are heard on Facebook. Mr. Dorsey, let me turn to you and ask you the same question in the context of bots. Brown University recently did a study that showed that about 25% of all tweets about climate change are generated by bots. Most of them obviously push out climate denial, as I described that operation. How is Twitter's capacity to identify a bot as opposed to a real customer?
Well, to build off your previous question, I do think there is a difference, as Mark said, and I do think there are many coordinated campaigns to manipulate the public conversation, to divide people all around the world, to confuse and generally to distract. And we do have policies and enforcement to prevent as much of this as possible. It is a growing threat, and it shows no signs of slowing down. Bots are one way that entities do this. Sometimes it may look like a bot, but it's actually a human that is organized with other humans for a particular agenda. So it is challenging. We are doing work right now to better identify bots on our service.
Let me just interject, Mr. Dorsey, real quick. As a baseline proposition, do you agree that a bot does not deserve a voice on your platform, that it should be actual people and organizations?
I don't agree with that as a high level. I think we should be labeling bots so that people have greater context for what they're interacting with.
Fair enough.
There are plenty of bots on our service that provide a valuable function, and I wouldn't want to take that away.
Let me ask both of you, and maybe you can supplement this as with the answer in writing for the record, because my time is getting short and this is a complicated question. But the question is, when does it matter to Twitter and when does it matter to Facebook to know who the actual entity is who is using your platform? Let me start with you, Mr. Dorsey, since Mr. Zuckerberg went first last time. And you can defer to a written answer if you like, because my time's running very short.
We'll add to this conversation with a written answer, but I do believe that pseudonymity is important. We have seen its usefulness with activists and with whistleblowers, and I think that is critical. But certainly there are times, and it's judged by a severity of potential outcomes, where we need to dig into identity and take actions.
We'll follow up with that. And let me just ask you, since my time has expired, Mr. Zuckerberg, to respond or have your organization respond in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we, Senator Whitehouse brought up something very important, and I'm going to add this as directly as I can, ask this as directly as I can. To Facebook and Twitter, do you have any internal research or evidence to suggest that your platforms can be addictive? Mr. Zuckerberg.
Senator, I think we can follow up with a summary of research that we have, but from what I've seen so far, it's inconclusive, and most of the research suggests that the vast majority of people do not perceive or experience these services as addictive or have issues. But I do think that there should be controls given to people to help them manage their experience better. And this is something that we're very focused on.
Mr. Dorsey.
I'm not aware of internal research, but we can follow up. But I do think, like anything else, these tools can be addictive, and we should be aware of that, acknowledge it, and make sure that we are making our customers aware of better patterns of usage. So the more information, the better here.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the late 19th century, the heads of the biggest corporations in America, the robber barons, got together and they set rates, they set prices, they determined how they would control information flow, they determined how they get rid of competition. And I'll be darned if we aren't right back there again. Except for this time, you're the robber barons. Your companies are the most powerful companies in the world, and I want to talk about how you're coordinating together to control information. In recent days, my office was contacted by a Facebook whistleblower, a former employee of the company with direct knowledge of the company's content moderation practices, and I want to start by talking about an internal platform called Tasks that Facebook uses to coordinate projects, including censorship. The Tasks platform allows Facebook employees to communicate about projects they're working on together. That includes Facebook's censorship teams, including the so-called community well-being team, the integrity team, and the hate speech engineering team, who all use the Task platform to discuss which individuals or hashtags or websites to ban. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, you're familiar with the Task platform, aren't you?
Senator, we use the task system for, I think it's, as you say, for people coordinating all kinds of work across the company, although I'm not sure if I'd agree with the characterization specifically around content moderation that you gave.
Well, let's get into that, and let me see if we can refresh your memory and provide folks at home watching with an example. Here over my shoulder is an example. It's a screenshot of the Task platform in use. You'll notice if the cameras zoom in, several references to election integrity throughout on these lists of tasks. Again, this is shared across Facebook's sites, company locations, by working groups. What particularly intrigued me is that the platform reflects censorship input from Google and Twitter as well. So Facebook, as I understand it, Facebook censorship teams communicate with their counterparts at Twitter and Google and then enter those companies' suggestions for censorship onto the Task platform so that Facebook can then follow up with them and effectively coordinate their censorship efforts. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, let me just ask you directly, under oath now, does Facebook coordinate its content moderation policies or efforts in any way with Google or Twitter?
Senator, let me be clear about this. We do coordinate on and share signals on security-related topics. So, for example, if there is signal around a terrorist attack or around child exploitation imagery or around a foreign government creating an influence operation, that is an area where the companies do share signals about what they see. But I think it's important to be very clear that that is distinct from the content moderation policies that we or the other companies have, where once we share intelligence or signals between the companies, each company makes its own assessment of the right way to address and deal with that information.
Well, I'm talking about content moderation. I'm talking about individuals, websites, hashtags, phrases to ban. Is it your testimony that you do not communicate with Twitter or Google about content moderation, about individuals, websites, phrases, hashtags to ban? Just yes or no. Do you communicate with Twitter or Google about coordinating your policies in this way?
Senator, we do not coordinate our policies.
Do your Facebook content moderation teams communicate with their counterparts at Twitter or Google?
Senator, I'm not aware of anything specific, but I think it would be probably pretty normal for people to talk to their peers and colleagues in the industry.
It would be normal, but you don't do it?
No, I'm saying that I'm not aware of any particular conversation, but I would expect that some level of communication probably happens. But that is different from coordinating what our policies are or our responses in specific instances.
Well, fortunately, I understand that the Task platform is searchable. So will you provide a list of every mention of Google or Twitter from the Tasks platform to this committee?
Senator, that's something that I can follow up with you and your team after on.
Well, yes or no, I'm sure you can follow up with the list, but why don't you commit while I've got you here under oath? It's so much better to do this under oath. Will you commit now to providing a list from the tasks platform of every mention of Google or Twitter?
Senator, respectfully, I'm without having looked into this, I'm not aware of any sensitivity that might exist around that. So I don't think it would be wise for me to commit to that right now, but I would be happy to follow.
How many items on the task platform reflect that Facebook, Twitter, and Google are sharing information about websites or hashtags or platforms that they want to suppress?
Senator, I do not know.
Will you provide a list of every website and hashtag that Facebook content moderation teams have discussed banning on the task platform?
Senator, again, I would be happy to follow up with you or your team to discuss further how we might move forward on that. But without
will you commit to it here? Senator Cruz and Senator Lee both asked you for lists of individuals, websites, entities that have been subject to content moderation. You expressed doubt about whether any such information exists, but you've also now said that the task website, you've acknowledged the task platform exists, that it is searchable. So will you commit to providing the information you have logged on the task website about content moderation that your company has undertaken? Yes or no?
Senator, I think it would be better to follow up once I've had a chance to discuss with my team what any sensitivity around that would be that might prevent the kind of sharing that you're talking about. But once I've done that, I would be happy to follow up.
All right. So you won't commit to do it here. We could, of course, subpoena this information, but I'd much rather get it from you voluntarily. But I think let everybody take note that Mr. Zuckerberg has now repeatedly refused to provide information that he knows that he has and has now acknowledged that he has, that Tasks has under oath. Let me switch to a different topic. Mr. Zuckerberg, tell me about Centra. What is the Facebook internal tool called Centra?
Senator, I'm not aware of any tool with that name.
Well, let me see if this refreshes your memory. There's a demonstrative now over my shoulder. Centra is a tool that Facebook uses to track its users, not just on Facebook, but across the entire internet. Centra tracks different profiles that a user visits, their message recipients, their linked accounts, the pages they visit around the web that have Facebook buttons. Centra also uses behavioral data to monitor users' accounts, even if those accounts are registered under a different name. And you can see a shot here, a screenshot provided to us of the Centra platform. We blocked out the user's name in the interest of privacy, although you can see this individual's birth date and age, when they first started using Facebook, their last login, as well as all manner of trackings. How many different devices have they used to access Facebook? How many different accounts are associated with their name? What accounts have they visited? What photos have they tagged? And on and on and on. Mr. Zuckerberg, how many accounts in the United States have been subject to review and shut down through Centra?
Senator, I do not know because I'm not actually familiar with the name of that tool. I'm sure that we have tools that help us with our platform and community integrity work. But I am not familiar with that name.
Do you have a tool that does exactly what I've described and that you can see here over my shoulder? Or are you saying that that doesn't exist?
Senator, I'm saying that I'm not familiar with it and that I'd be happy to follow up and get you and your team the information that you would like on this. But I'm limited in what I can, what I'm familiar with and can share today.
It's always amazing to me, Mr. Chairman, how many people before this committee suddenly develop amnesia. Maybe it is something about the air in the room. Let me ask you this. When a Facebook employee accesses a user's private information, like their private messages or their personally identifiable data, is a record made of that, Mr. Zuckerberg?
Sorry, Senator, can you repeat that?
Is a record made of any time a Facebook employee accesses a user's private information, personally identifiable information, for example, messages? Is a record made any time a Facebook employee does that?
Senator, I believe so.
Does it trigger an audit?
Senator, I think sometimes it may.
How many audits have been conducted?
Senator, I do not know the exact number of
Can
audits.
you give me a list?
Senator, we can follow up on that to see what would be useful here.
Will you, I'm almost finished, Mr. Chairman. Will you commit to giving us a list of the number of times Facebook employees have accessed users' personal account information without their knowledge? Yes or no?
Senator, we should follow up on what would be useful here. It is, of course, in the operations of the company, if someone reports something, sometimes necessary for people at the company to go review and understand the context around what is happening when someone reports something. So this is fairly frequent and is a matter of course. We do have security systems that can detect anomalous patterns to flag. But we should follow up in more detail on what you're interested in.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just say in closing that what we have here is clear evidence of coordination between Twitter, Google, and Facebook. Mr. Zuckerberg knows he has the tools to track this, but he either doesn't remember or won't commit to letting us see it. We have evidence of Facebook tracking its own users all across the web. Mr. Zuckerberg won't answer questions about it, can't remember the name, isn't sure if the tool is deployed in this way, and won't commit to giving us basic information. I submit to you that this is both totally unacceptable and totally predictable, because it is exactly what these tech companies have done to the American people and to Congress for years now, which is why it is time we took action against these modern-day robber barons. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm, as you know, the lead Democrat